Hello, this is Darren Pulsipher, Chief Solution Architect of Public Sector at Intel, and welcome to Embracing Digital Transformation, where we investigate effective change leveraging people, process, and technology. On today's episode, we're going to talk about ransomware and how to deal with it with special guest Stephanie Sabatini from Hitachi Systems Security. Stephanie, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Hey, when I first heard you talking about ransomware and things like this, I was like, whoa, this is very pertinent, right? Because we have a lot of ransomware attacks going on right now. Now, you're the Senior Director of Professional Systems, Professional Services, right? At Hitachi Systems, right?
That's right.
See, I finally got it out of my mouth.
It's long. It's
long and it's past, we just got off the holidays. So I'm still recuperating a little bit, but
we're settling in. We're settling back in.
Now, you were telling me earlier, you didn't get much of a holiday break because when you're dealing with ransomware, it happens all the time, right?
It happens all the time, but especially for some reason at Christmas time. So Christmas Eve was especially busy for us this year. And it was just ransomware attack after ransomware attack.
I'm so sorry to hear that, but it keeps you employed, I guess, right?
Yeah. So. And when you love your work, it's okay, right? So it was exciting. It was a very thrilling day for us.
So you kind of tell me what I do. I mean, let's say I have a mid-sized company or even a big company, or I'm in a state and local government. What do I do? I mean, how do I prevent it? What do I do when it happens? Give me your spiel.
Where do I start? So I'll start at the beginning. Basically when it happens. So maybe we'll start at the end. So basically everybody knows the ransomware attack ends with a ransom request of some sort, right? So the company is being extorted. And usually it's either by encrypting all the information that they can possibly get from compromised systems. Like, so they'll encrypt hard drives. They'll basically just lock down whatever they can, or they steal sensitive information and they threaten to release it publicly. So in either of those cases, in order to stop that or to, reinstate the information, or say they're going to blow away, delete and prove that they've deleted the sensitive information that they've stolen, they request a sum of money, and usually it's a pretty high sum of money. And there's two camps on that. So sometimes it's very targeted and they know how much money the company can afford, and they'll ask for a massive amount of money. And then in other forms of attacks that are less targeted, they're just sort of like shotgun type attacks where they just blast and hope that they hit someone. They'll ask for a sum of money that they feel is a lot, and sometimes it doesn't match the organization. So the organization is like this, let's say they've done really well that year and the ransom is like 10K. So it's not always proportional, but we're seeing more and more sophisticated attacks where they've done their homework. They know what they're asking for. They know if the company can afford it, and they even calculate, they'll figure it out. So we know we've, gained this much traction. We've moved laterally through the environment. We've compromised multiple domains or segments or what have you throughout this organization. And they know that the organization is going to be in a bad way, and it's going to cost them a lot of money to reinstate or to get their services up and running, so they can ask for more.
So that brings up a good question. Ransomware attacks are not something that just someone hacked me this afternoon, now they do a ransomware. They spend time in your systems. It sounds like compromising several different systems. It goes very horizontal in your organization then, right?
Yeah, I think the average, I don't have the statistics in front of me, but I think it's like just under 300 days is roughly the amount of time it could take on average for a ransomware attack to actually fully be executed, because they're trying to get as far as they can within this network to make it as impactful as they can.
Wow, I never thought that. I thought it would be get in, get your ransom, get out, but it's not. You're saying they're in there a while, quietly doing things, gathering information, and then they spring the trap.
Compromising as much as they can. They want to blow away the backup execs so that they cripple the organization. The organization may think, oh, well, we'll just reinstall the data. Okay, it's all encrypted, no problem. We'll reinstall it. But then they go and check their backups, and their backups are completely blown away or corrupted. They're unusable. So they take some time doing this. They compromise credentials. They do privilege escalation to be able to move laterally throughout the network. They get as far as they can, and they'll use any sort of vulnerability that they can exploit to do that.
So what's the biggest vulnerability you see them using today?
So
What's the
there's
most
no,
common, I should say?
yeah, that changes weekly, right? When we saw the
Really?
log. So like it depends on what's going on in the world of vulnerability management, right? So if the organization has a really tight patch management and vulnerability management, asset management sort of policies or procedures and teams to take care of that stuff, then they have less attack surfaces than maybe an organization who spends less time on vulnerability management. And it's really, I think, on an attack by attack basis. So
Interesting.
the threat actors will exploit what they can, and sometimes it's people. So they basically use any vector of attack that they can.
Phishing attack, internal phishing attacks is what you're talking about.
Yeah, they'll do phishing attacks, or even just more like social engineering. So they'll try. So in the reconnaissance phase of this type of attack, where the attackers are just gathering all the information they can to figure out what their plan of attack is going to be, they'll make phone calls. They'll impersonate. We've seen tons of examples of attackers using let's say like executive type like names. They'll gain all the information they can on an executive and then impersonate them online and try to get employees to divulge information or provide them with the whatever data they need to carry out further attacks.
This is pretty scary stuff, Stephanie. I mean, you're scaring the living daylights out of me now.
No.
But there's hope right out there. I mean, what do I do now? Your team focuses on what to do when it happens, or you also do prevention as well?
So we do both. And I think, the best thing you can do. So you're right. Just to go back to the scare, I'm not trying to like instill fear in the hearts of anybody here, but it is scary. And the attacks are so sophisticated, but when you have control over your environment, you can kind of relax a little bit and understand like it's interesting to see these attacks evolve and get more sophisticated over time. And honestly, some of the tactics that are used are really smart. Like they're well thought of, they're well executed. And you, as a security engineer, I'm looking at it sometimes going like, that was slick, but for organizations, there's tons of stuff, strategies that can be taken to avoid getting ransomware, or at least reducing the impact of it. A lot of people in the industry say it's not a question of if, it's just a question of when. I personally don't believe that. I think that you're not going to be targeted if you lock down appropriately and take the appropriate steps. And that's really what you want to avoid, is getting targeted, because they got time, and they have resources to dedicate to that. So from the fear perspective, it's not scary, it's interesting, but there's, in terms of like what we can do to mitigate it, it all starts like, just by doing due diligence and the things that we've been talking about in the industry for decades. We can get into sort of the top 10 list of what I would recommend, or what other organizations recommend, because when you Google it online, if you Google like, how to protect against ransomware, how to defend against ransomware, everybody has a strategy, everyone has an opinion. But when you break it down and you look at them, what they're recommending, maybe they're using different terminology,
but it's all basically the same things.
It's all what we've been saying for decades. So do your vulnerability management, do your patch management, change your passwords, least privilege possible. Your admins, why are they on the internet with their administrative accounts posting on forums and stuff like that? It's about understanding what your attack surfaces are and managing them.
So that's really interesting, because you brought up something I think that we could sometimes miss, which is educating our people on good security practices. Like you mentioned, admin account out on like Stack Overflow, for example, or on a Slack channel, a public Slack channel. Yeah, you don't want those sorts of things out there, right? Because people don't, I think people might not equate their personal persona online to tied to the job that they have, and people are going to be, using that against them somehow. Very fascinating. Now, let's talk about, because this is more fascinating to me, because you guys specialize in this. What do I do when it happens?
What should you do, or what do people actually do?
All right, so give me both. What do people actually do?
There might be some sweating and crying involved. No, it's yeah. So what people actually do and what they should do are two different things, because the first knee-jerk reaction of IT ops really is to investigate, check out stuff, maybe reboot or patch or change the environment in significant ways, which basically will alert anyone who's compromised the environment that their time's up, fun's over now. So there's, also, if the company that is getting attacked wants to do any sort of forensic investigation, it's extremely important to just go easy on those environments and those systems. We want to make as few keystrokes as possible. Definitely do not reboot. But that's the first reaction. And some companies actually perform denial of services on themselves. They just shut everything down. They go into full lockdown mode and, they panic. So the first thing is don't panic. Definitely don't panic. We can definitely, we can work it out. It's not going to be pleasant. It's not going to be fun, depending on the organization. They should have incident response policies. So we run through those, we enact those so that we can manage communications, because the media, will definitely want to pick that up. And we need to manage the environment. Business has to keep going. And in some cases, the organizations, unfortunately, are completely crippled and they cannot continue to do business. So from our perspective, so when we're called for these types of situations, I was going to say engagements, but projects, it's not really, I understand, like it's for me, it's a project, but
I know for you, it's a project. For other people, it's my whole world is now ending, right?
Exactly. And I don't want to minimize that by calling it like an engagement or a project, but we approach it that way. And we have like a set of steps that we do to basically preserve the information, preferably observe some of the actual questionable activity that's going on in the network, because these ransomware attacks don't just begin and end with encrypting information or stealing information. There's a bunch of attacks that happen before that. And so we need to identify where they're coming from, where they originated, where they've been. And in order to do all of that, we need evidence and we need information. So, and it needs to be preserved. So that's, usually where we start, is getting the right people in the right place to manage,
It sounds to me like you're a digital Sherlock Holmes. Is that kind of what you do?
Yeah, well, we definitely have teams who focus like all of their time on just investigating attacks and breaches of all kinds.
Right.
So
okay, so we got that first step done, right? Preserve, do some forensics on what happened.
Don't panic.
What do I do?
So now the environment, unfortunately, once there's a ransomware or any sort of breach or incident, is considered highly vulnerable or risky, because we see, and this is, 100% of the time, we see environments that have undergone ransomware attacks successfully. It gets publicized or not. Even when they're not publicized, they're targeted by either the same group or a different group, because it's sort of like that, wounded animal. Now the vultures are circling, right? So they're going to go for it. They know you're wounded. They know that your attention is somewhere else. So there's going to be another attack coming for sure. Pretty much.
Oh, that's very, I never thought of that, because you always think, oh, that, that lion got that gazelle, no one else is going to mess with it, but that's not the case.
No, someone's coming to pick the bones, like, for sure.
Wow.
Yeah.
And when it rains,
Some
it pours.
really
Gosh.
does. And sometimes it's the same group, because organizations who try to handle this stuff on their own, sometimes they miss stuff, and they'll try to, contain, eradicate, do the whole like process that we see is well defined and documented and best practice. But it's possible that something was missed, or there's a whole area of the network that was still compromised, but not necessarily messed with. And so there's still the
So they were
potential
sitting in the
for,
wings waiting,
well,
right?
yeah, because especially like a fully compromised environment, they don't want to let go of that power. They don't want to let go of, the accomplishments and the potential for new attacks now, different attacks. And so most times when and this is actually, I'll agree with you, this is the scary part. Most times when we get in and we're doing our investigation, we find other indicators of attack or compromise. So we find other indicators of compromise in different parts of the network. And then we have to determine, was that part of the same attack, or is that a different attack?
Different attack.
So,
Wow.
so the investigation is a really critical part of any recovery from malware. Because even if you think you've got it cleaned up, and even if you think your business is running properly now, there's still the potential for this to either happen again or a different attack to happen.
Now, you were saying in some of the statistics that you shared with me, a typical attack costs an organization about $4.5 million just to
Yeah,
clean up, right?
yeah, that doesn't include the ransom. That's the average statistic. That was
Some
for
are a
last.
lot more and some are less, right?
Yeah, and depending on the size of the organization. So the larger the organization, the bigger the environment. So if this state is huge and they really move their way across it, then it's possible it's going to cost more money because it's just a bigger cleanup. So it's kind of proportional to the size of the organization.
Gotcha. Now, how many, or maybe you can't say how many companies are actually paying these ransoms, or do you just say, no, I'm not going to pay it. I can figure this out. Or is it always, hey, they always get paid?
So that's a really interesting question that comes down a lot to the psychology of the people making the decisions. So there are statistics on how many organizations pay ransomware, but I question how many of that, how
How much that's true?
valuable. Yeah, because it's hard to quantify, because a lot of these ransoms come with, like, the ransom comes with a note saying, like, this is your ransom. And if you contact law enforcement, if you disclose this, if you report it, we're going to basically just make all your sensitive information public and we're out. So don't do that. It's like a threat. It's like a gun to their head at that point. So it's hard to really answer that question and statistics and numbers. I look at statistics all the time just for interest, and they're varied. So
So they're all over the place, because we don't have a real picture, is what you're telling me of.
Not for the statistic, but I'll tell you how I've seen organizations respond. So
yeah.
In some cases, so the decision makers, whoever it might be, if it's the CIO or CFO, CEO, or the board, or whoever's making the decision on whether or not to pay the ransom, I've seen people get personally offended and say, we're not paying it, and they ruin the complete ability to negotiate. So they're so offended that they're like, we will pay, we'll spend whatever money we need to spend on forensics, on cleanup, on the eradication, on the rebuilding of our environments, whatever it is, but we're not dealing with that guy. He's rude, he just, so he, and it becomes like personal for them, and it clouds their judgment, because really at the end of the day, I'm going to say this and then I'm going to clarify what I mean by it, because it could be misleading right off the bat. But at the end of the day, if your objective is just to get your business up and running and be able to continue to do business and make money, paying a low ransom of like 10 grand or 16 grand is going to be a lot cheaper than what's going to happen next with, forensics and trying to do all the stuff. However, there's a lot of documented cases where ransom is paid and the data is not restored fully. They have no comfort around the security of their environment. And a lot of governments around the world are saying that you do not pay, it is illegal to pay the ransom. You do not pay the ransom.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah. So it depends on how it's regulated. And in some countries, it's seen as like terrorism, right? So we do not negotiate with terrorists. So.
Gotcha. Well,
Mhm,
and in some cases it has turned into that. You know, if you look at the meatpacking ransom attack that happened in the
mhm.
United States, and then the Centennial Pipeline
Oh,
attack,
yes.
and yeah, Sony was probably the first big public attack when they stole all that information from Sony
Mhm.
and said, "Hey, we're releasing all these emails unless you pay us a bunch of money." They released them anyway, but you know, um,
Exactly. There's no guarantee, I mean, we're asking criminals to act in good faith. So, you know,
right, right.
so at the end of the day, we a lot of the also like on the note of the ransom itself, in the note where it says like if you contact authorities or whatever, we'll release your information. A lot of those threat actors are also including that they will not negotiate with professional negotiators. So we're seeing it less and less. So part of our role as well is because of that emotional component where the organization, they're already, they're taking it personally. They cannot, you need to be sort of like very rational. You can't make emotional decisions in these cases. And so they have professional negotiators, like we have professional negotiators that'll negotiate either to lower the ransom or whatever the case may be. And the attack groups are saying, we won't deal with professional negotiators. This is the person we want to speak to, and they'll ask for them by name, and that's it.
Do they actually call people, or are they sending electronic emails, or you know, and
Yeah,
how are they
well,
communicating?
yeah, so it depends on on what type of ransomware, but we've seen it like basically it's like your desktop background will contain, it'll change and it'll contain the ransom. We've seen it by phone, we've seen it by email. Um, yeah.
Wow, wow, that's truly fascinating. I can see why you love your job.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting. It changes. It sounds like it changes all the time.
It's never a dull moment, that's for sure.
No, I can totally see that. Any parting words you want to give to people out there that are going through this, or you know, what should they do besides take a deep breath and
Yeah.
hire a professional to come in, right?
Well, I would say don't wait until you're in that situation. Do your due diligence, do the assessments to find out where your gaps are in terms of your security. These need to happen at least annually, just to know, keep your finger on the pulse of the security controls and how they're operating, if they're working, if they're not working, because threats change, attacks change, they become more sophisticated. So your security has to keep up with that. There's no like check in the box, like that we did it, it's a continual process forever and ever. It's got it. You cannot just sit back and be like, okay, we're good. You have to continually monitor, continually patch, continually do vulnerability management, continually change those passwords, continually remind users of what's out there. The phishing campaigns work, they work, implement consequences. So the best advice is to do that, all the preventative stuff that you should be doing, but don't just stop at that. The reason why the controls are all the same. So everything we've been saying companies should be doing for decades, it's not news. It's just that they're failing at it. So organizations are not doing a good job of implementing the controls. So there needs to be more time and energy spent on maybe, what is our current state? What is our maturity? Where do we want to go and how do we make it happen? Because these things are evolving and they are evolving quickly. So prevention, I think, is first of all the best thing.
Is the best. Yeah.
Due diligence. And then if you happen to get ransomware anyway, hopefully you've done all the preventative stuff and the impact is minimal or contained at least, and manageable. And definitely reach out to experts who deal with this day in and day out, because an organization that has like one ransomware attack or one incident, it's very hard for them to nail it the first time. So get an expert in and let them help you or guide you through the process. And one of the things we do is so tabletop exercises for incident response works. Like everybody will know, they run through the whole incident response plan and everyone will know we do scenarios. So you could do a ransomware scenario.
So all right, that's really good. I want to drill in on that a little bit. So what you're saying there is in your business continuity plans that you have, you should have a cyber incident plan that you actually run the scenario before it happens, right? And that's what your team can help an organization build those types of plans so that when it does happen, I know exactly what to do, who to call, and I'm not doing stupid things that cause, more damage or whatever. That's what you're saying, right?
Absolutely, because they have it. So the business continuity plan is really for the business, and then there's a disaster recovery plan which supports IT, and then there's incident response. And incident response can be any incident, it could be performance issues or whatever, but security incidents obviously have a component in there, and different organizations organize that in different ways. But the key point is to run through that whole process and use cases, so scenarios. And you can use ones that have happened in real life to similar organizations, or you can make up your own based on what the likelihood is, for your organization. And it gives the organization an opportunity to not just have these documents, documented in theory, but to practice them. So if there's a gap, if someone's missing from the equation, we know, so communications manager, incident manager, these are two roles that are continually forgotten. Nobody thinks about how are we going to handle communications? Well, communication is super important because someone needs to craft the message to the media, because the media is going to write something anyway. So you may as well have somebody in the forefront who knows how to handle it, who knows what to say, who has material ready in hand. And it just really helps organizations not get caught off guard and minimize the whole fallout from any type of incident.
Right, because in some of these some of your customers actually have customers of their own where they may have personal information. So notifying, that's part of your communication plan too. Notifying the people that are impacted by this data, either data loss or data intrusion or ransomware, whatever it may be. I mean, that's right.
Yeah, there's always notifications. So even your internal employees need to know if their own information has been potentially compromised. So you have internal communications, external communications, communications to customers, service providers, you name it. So the communications manager is a key element to an incident response plan for sure.
So for 2022, what do you think your biggest concern is for 2022 moving forward for people that people should be aware of, or that you'd say, if there's one thing you could do for 2022, do this?
Invest in security. Just invest in your
Just
security.
Spend some money and time, right?
Put some money into security, because if you look at the cost of what breaches will cost an organization, it's a fraction of what implementing the controls and tools in the first place will cost you. So it's always, it's definitely better value to do the due diligence ahead of time to avoid the incidents or to minimize the impact of incidents. So yeah, I'd like to say that was the key. I mean, you have to invest for sure. Because if you don't have the budget up front for the operational stuff,
where do you get money when your financial system has been compromised in ransomware? You're like, oh, that's a tough one.
The cost after post a incident is far outweighs preparing or preventing it in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, Stephanie, this has been wonderful. Thank you for coming on the show. Invaluable. I think we had some fun. Even though you're scaring me a lot, that's how it goes.
I don't want people to be afraid. I want them to feel empowered.
Empowered and be prepared, right? Be prepared. That's what you're saying.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
Hey, thanks. Thank you for listening to Embracing Digital Transformation today. If you enjoyed our podcast, give it 5 stars on your favorite podcasting site or YouTube channel. You can find out more information about Embracing Digital Transformation at embracingdigital.org. Until next time, go out and do something wonderful.